Belief comes before ability. This one's a story from Kobe Bryant's biography. One of his counselors in school noticed that under career plans, Kobe had listed NBA. Just three words NBA. That's the National Basketball Association. It's like the IPL but for basketball in America. So the counselor made it a point to warn Kobe only one in a million make it to the NBA. So you have to plan a future other than basketball. This is what Kobe said to him. I'm going to be that one in a million. Kobe was 11 years old. He had the belief long before he had the ability. And he went on to become one of the best basketball players ever. Now, in an entirely different industry, music, Jay-Z, the American rapper and businessman worth $2.5 billion, said in his biography, we started a fan club before we even had any fans. Call it delusional optimism, but this is what it really is. Belief comes before ability. That is the maxim and the single most important sentence that I'm going to say to you today. It's the core thesis of everything that we're going to talk about. The external world has this backwards. The belief that you can do something is a prerequisite for trying. Belief always comes before ability. If you're waiting for the external world to encourage you or edge you on, it's impossible to achieve outlier success. Welcome back to Billionaire Best Friend. I'm starting a new series today called Maxim Mondays. Usually I'm deep in the books, reading 500 pages on a dead tycoon so you don't have to. But on Mondays, you and I will discuss a single idea, a single sentence, a maxim that is so powerful it unlocks the stories of 50 different founders at once. Let's dive in. Belief comes before ability. This is something David Senra talks about on Founders Podcast, and it's something that you and I see over and over again in the biographies of the people we study. The world teaches us a linear path. You get a degree, you learn a skill, you get good at it, you get results, and then you get confident. You get the ability, then the belief. But if you look at our billionaire best friends, the Steve Jobs of the world, the Dhirubhai Ambani, Elon Musk, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, that is not how it works. For the outliers, the physics is inverted. The belief is the prerequisite. You have to believe you can do it before you have any evidence that you can. One of the best examples of this maxim is Steve Jobs' reality distortion field. It's a state born out of his unbelievable conviction and propagated by his charisma, where he'd convince himself and others to believe in and achieve what seems impossible. There's this famous story from the development of the Macintosh. The Mac is taking too long to boot up. The engineers, who are smart, rational people, tell Jobs, Steve, the hardware is maxed out. We don't have the ability to make it faster. Now, a normal manager accepts the limitation of ability. Jobs doesn't. He shifts the frame from engineering to morality. He looks at them and says, if it could save a person's life, could you find a way to shave 10 seconds off? The engineers are confused. So Jobs goes to the whiteboard, he does the math and says, if 5 million people use the Mac and it takes 10 seconds extra to turn on every day, that's 300 million hours a year. That's at least 100 lifetimes. If you don't fix this code, you're effectively killing 100 people a year. He didn't give them better chips or more RAM. He gave them a belief. We are saving lives. And guess what? A few weeks later, they came back with code that was 28 seconds faster. The ability did not exist until belief forced it into existence. Now, Steve Jobs did not invent this maxim. He learned it from his mentor, his hero, Edwin Land. David Senra from Founders Podcast calls him the Steve Jobs before Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs hailed him as a national treasure and once confessed that meeting Land was like visiting a shrine. So Edwin Land was in his 70s and a 20-year-old Steve Jobs goes to meet him. And this is how he's describing it. Meeting Land was like visiting a shrine. So Edwin Land is the founder of Polaroid, the camera company. And he once said that Marketing is what you do when your product is no good. This, I think, is the absolute definition of belief before ability. Now, think about what he's saying there. The absolute arrogance of the statement. If you have to convince someone to buy your product, you failed. He believed that if you created something that was profoundly beautiful, something that existed at the intersection of art and technology, the human reaction to it would be involuntary. You wouldn't need marketing because the product would speak to a desire the customer didn't even know they had. Also, the customer couldn't even articulate the want because the ability to make such products didn't even existed yet. Way before instant photos were a thing, when photos took a week to come back from the studio, Edwin Land believed that an instant photo camera was possible. He told Steve Jobs, I could see what the Polaroid camera should be. It was just as real to me as if it was sitting in front of me before I had ever built one. And Steve's eyes light up. He says, yes, that's exactly the way I saw the Macintosh. The belief that such revolutionary products can exist preceded the ability to build them. Now I want to take you to 2001. This is one of the most insane stories in business history. Elon Musk, then a young tech millionaire, decides he wants to send a greenhouse to Mars. He wanted to reignite people's interest in space technology and Mars so that NASA increases their budget. He flies to Moscow. He's trying to buy refurbished ICBMs. Those are nuclear missiles without the bombs from the Russians. Now picture this. You have the Russian aerospace chiefs. These are hard, cold Soviet era guys. And in walks this young, nerdy .com millionaire. They look at him and they see a rich kid, tourist. In one meeting, a chief designer actually spit on Musk's shoes. They literally spit on him. He still returns with cash thinking they'll sell it for $8 million for two. But they change the deal saying they're $8 million a pop. Musk hesitates, doing the math, and they just laugh at him. They thought he was a joke. Now, most people would quit right there. The ability isn't there. It's an impossible situation. But this is what makes Elon Musk, Elon Musk. On the flight back from Russia, his consultants, Mike Griffin and Jim Cantrell, are sitting there drinking whiskey, thinking, well, that was a fun trip. Too bad it didn't work out. And Elon is infuriated, working on his laptop. They're thinking, freaking nerd, what's he doing now? He turns the screen to them and says, guys, I think we can build the rocket ourselves. A US launcher cost $65 million. Russians were $8 million. Musk calculated that the actual cost of materials that went into making a rocket was only 2 to 3% of the total cost. He didn't have the ability. He just had a spreadsheet and a belief that physics allowed for a cheaper rocket. He spends the next year reading textbooks, deeply detailed technical books on rocket science and the aerospace industry, talking to experts and understanding everything that is necessary. He's forcing the ability into his brain through sheer force of will. This is the genesis of SpaceX, worth $800 billion today. But nothing was easy here. Everything was borderline impossible. You have to read this book named Lift Off. It's fantastic. It documents what happens next. Elon sells his company PayPal and nets around $180 million. He invests $100 million in SpaceX, $70 million in Tesla, and $10 million in Solar City. And for the next 6 years, they just kept failing. 80% of this book is Elon, the now richest man on earth, failing and going through hell. 2006, 2007, 2008, 3 consecutive years, 3 consecutive flight launches, all crashed. Money is literally burning in a pit fire. Also, his personal life is in ruins. His first son dies months after SpaceX is incorporated. He's filed for divorce from his first wife. He's personally bankrupt and living off loans from his friends. Both his companies are months away from bankruptcy. No one supporting his vision, not even his heroes in the space industry. Also, there's this clip, I've watched it 100 times, from 60 Minutes. The interviewer asked Elon about his heroes Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, the first and last men on the moon. These guys testified before Congress saying that what SpaceX was doing wasn't safe. They said it threatened America's standing. And you see Elon, this guy who is usually so robotic, he tears up. He has tears in his eyes. He can barely speak. He says, I wish they would come visit. I wish they would see how hard we are working. It is brutal. They couldn't get a launch pad in California because the Air Force locked them out. So they have to move operations to Omelek Island in the middle of nowhere. The conditions are hell on earth. The salt spray is corroding the rocket parts. The team is sleeping in trailers, cooking on hot plates. These guys are completely isolated. This is one story in the book that I absolutely love. It tells you everything about the culture. It was feral. They sent an intern on this frantic mission to transport a critical rocket part to the island. And because he's traveling through this lawless part of the world and he's feeling the pressure of we have to save the company, he reportedly brings a gun with him for the protection. This wasn't a sterile NASA lab, this was a pirate ship. On September 28, 2008, Falcon 1 Flight 4 reaches orbit. That was the moment. That was when belief finally became ability. But that ability was forged in the fire of 6 years of eating glass and staring into the abyss. He had no money left. He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. If this fourth rocket had exploded, SpaceX would be dead. Tesla was also running out of money. Musk irrationally split the money to both Tesla and SpaceX alive, risking $0 across the board. Rocket launch succeeds, and 3 months later, SpaceX is awarded NASA contract worth $1.6 billion. Also, he raises last-minute funding which saves Tesla from bankruptcy just 2 days before they would have failed to pay salaries. There are two things that I want to talk about here. One, I want to compare Musk to a guy named Andy Beal from Beal Aerospace. But before that, I want to talk about his personal life. Divorce is tough, but tougher when you are building a company. This reminds me that the belief that comes before ability sometimes does not even has to be your own. If your parents, your wife, your closed ones support you, it means the world to the entrepreneur. Stephen King talks about the belief and support he received from his wife. He's one of the most successful authors of the past 50 years and has a literary empire worth $500 million. This is what he said in his autobiography. My wife made a crucial difference during those 2 years when they were broke and failing. So Tabby is the name of his wife, and this is what he's saying. Tabby never voiced a single doubt. Her support was a constant. One of the few good things I could take as a given. And whenever I see a first novel dedicated to a wife or a husband, I smile and think, there's someone who knows. Writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. They don't have to make speeches. Just believing is usually enough. Now about Andy Beal, he was a Texas billionaire. He started a rocket company, Beal Aerospace, in the 90s. He had more money than Musk. He had great engineers, but when it got hard, he looked at the spreadsheet, saw the government bureaucracy and the risk, and he said, this doesn't make sense, and he quit. He had the ability, but he lacked the irrational belief. Musk didn't succeed because he was smarter than Andy Beal. He succeeded because the mission was existential to him. He refused to stop until the physics obeyed his belief. This is the key insight. The ability to run a successful aerospace company was only proven after he risked total ruin. If he had waited for proof that it would work, he would have quit. The lesson is clear. You don't wait for the skills to start the mission. You start the mission. And the magnitude of the challenges forces you to acquire the skills. This is for my Indian listeners. Let's come back to India. This is maybe the most radical example of belief comes before ability that I have ever found. If you look at the standard playbook for a software billionaire, it involves Stanford, San Francisco, and venture capital. That is the map of ability. Sridhar Vembu looked at the map. and threw it in the trash. It's the year 2000, the height of the dot-com bubble, and a venture capitalist puts a term sheet on the table, $10 million for a small stake, valuing Sridhar's company Advent Net at $140 million. Some sources say it was close to $200 million. This is life changing money times 10. It is the ultimate ability, the ability to scale, to hire, to advertise. And Sridhar looks at the guy and says, "No." The VC storms out, calling him arrogant. But Sridhar had a belief about freedom that he valued more than the cash. He said, "I am in business to run a business, not to run away from it." He believed that taking the money started a ticking clock. Venture capitalists invest to exit, not to create long term value. And guess what? 12 months later, the dot com bubble burst. All his competitors who had the ability to spend but high burn rates, VCs forced them into liquidation. There was a US hospitality startup that raised $53 million. They had all the ability in the world and they went to zero. Sridhar, the guy with the belief, walked into their liquidation sale and bought their domain name, Zoho.com. This is the perfect metaphor. $53 million of ability lost to $0 of belief. But the most insane part is how he applies this to human beings. Standard wisdom says if you want to compete with Google and Salesforce, this is who Zoho competes with, you hire from MIT and IIT. I believe talent is universal, but opportunity is not. He literally goes to rural villages and hires 17-year-old kids whose parents are daily wage laborers, kids who are going to be wall painters or construction workers, and he says, "I don't care about the piece of paper. I believe you can code as well as a guy from MIT if I give you the right environment." And he's giving them the right environment because he has the belief in these people's ability. They just need proper training and then they can code as well as a guy from MIT. So Sridhar runs Zoho schools, and this is very crazy. Almost 20% of Zoho's engineers don't have engineering degrees. He manufactured talent out of thin air because he believed it was there. He moved the company to Tenkasi. It's a rural district with no airport and erratic power, and built a world-class campus because this is another one of his beliefs. Urbanization is destroying the soul. He calls this spiritual capitalism. Now, this is one really interesting thing about Sridhar Vembu. He believes in non-duality, which means most billionaires, they believe that, oh, I'm going to create a lot of money through my business and the means justify the end. Then I'm going to donate a certain part of it. Sridhar does not believe in this. He believes in non-duality, which is corporation or business itself as a force for good. He refuses to separate moral conviction from business strategy. As he puts this thing brilliantly about other companies, they fight for the quarter. We fight for the quarter century. If you extend the timeline, the ability gap disappears. I can learn anything in 10 years. Those companies cannot learn patience in 10 years because their shareholders won't let them. I really need to make a long form podcast on Sridhar Vembu and Zoho, and I'm going to do this soon. Now, from the Indian village of Tenkasi, I want to take you to the America of 1934. Walt Disney was attempting to do something the film industry considered impossible and potentially ruinous. He was trying to create the world's first full-length animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. At that time, animation was strictly seen as filler entertainment, short 6-7 minute comedy shows before the main movie. Disney's goal was to break out of that format and elevate animation into a respected emotional storytelling medium. He famously said, "I want the audience to care about these drawings." So by then, he realized that short cartoons like Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphonies had hit a ceiling. They were expensive to make, but theaters paid a flat, low rate for them regardless of quality. So to survive and grow the studio, He needed a product that could command box office admission prices on its own rather than just being a side dish to a live action movie. But the technology didn't existed yet. The animators weren't trained for realism. The money wasn't there. The industry and even his own brother Roy, who's also his business partner, called the project Disney's folly. The prevailing belief was that audiences would not sit through 80 minutes of bright colors and cartoons without getting a headache or getting bored. The common wisdom was that watching 80 minutes of bright technicolor would literally make the audience's eyes hurt, but plays this game of financial chicken that lasts 3 years. He had this belief. He takes an initial budget of $250,000 and blows it up 6x to $1.5 million. That's roughly $35 million in today's money, right in the middle of the Great Depression. Despite his personal doubts and the impossible math, Roy, his brother, worked tirelessly to make Walt's vision happen. Once he realized Walt would not be deterred, he became physically ill from the stress, terrified watching Walt mortgage his home and even hawk his life insurance. Roy said to the bankers who financed us, "I'm sure he seemed like a wild man, hell bent for bankruptcy." But Walt knew he had to transfer his belief to the team. There is this legendary night where he gathers his top animators, gives them 50 cents for dinner, which is a very big amount of money back in the days, and performs the entire movie as a 4-hour solo play. He becomes the Wicked Queen. He becomes the Seven Dwarfs. Ken Anderson, one of his employees, said, "We were spellbound. He was the best actor of us all." By the end of the performance, his skeptical staff got sold on the vision, realizing he wasn't just making a long cartoon but a legitimate film. They risk everything on that one release and borrow everything they can. When they finally showed the rough cuts to Joseph Rosenberg, their banker at Bank of America, the guy holding their fate, he sat stone-faced, walked to his car, and then finally turned to Walt and said, "That thing is going to make a hat full of money." And he was right. At the premiere, Walt looks out and sees Clark Gable and Carol Lombard, the toughest stars in Hollywood, weeping over a drawing, tears running down their faces. As Walt said later, "I knew we had them." It funded the next 50 years of the studio, but it only happened because he was willing to bet his literal life on a vision no one else could see. But this was not the first time that belief came before ability in his life. Ray Kroc and Walt Disney were both ambulance drivers in World War I, and this is what Ray Kroc is saying about one of the guys lied about his age to get in, and he was in with us. When we were out with everyone else chasing girls, he stayed in camp drawing pictures. His name was Walt Disney. One of his early partners said about him that he and other artists would play poker during breaks. Walt would sit at his board practicing various renditions of his signature because he knew he'd be world famous one day. Now let's come back to the Indian city of Bangalore. From starting trading to earn extra money to building a 100% private behemoth, almost $500 million in profit, Nitin Kamath built Zerodha. But before that, he spent 10 years in the wilderness. We have to go back to 2001. He's 17 years old, trading his mother's account because legally he could not make his own account. He was underage, and he wipes out around 4 to 5 lakh rupees. That is a fortune for a student. That is absolute ruin. The rational actor looks at that loss and says, "I do not have the ability to beat the market." But Nitin had this irrational belief that the market was just a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. So what does he do? He gets a job at a call center, dialing the United States for telesales, earning 8,000 rupees a month. That's like $100. He says, "I was trading the Indian markets during the day and working the phones at night, sleeping only on weekends for nearly 4 years. He slept 4 hours a night for 4 years to fund his belief system with minimum wage labor. It reminds me exactly of James Dyson in his shed. Nitin was a fund manager already in his head, using grit as a proxy for capital. He protected that identity when the reality of his bank account said he was a failure. Fast forward to the launch in 2010, and he still doesn't have the ability. He is a college dropout with no marketing budget and launches Zerodha with zero proprietary technology. He's using a white label platform from the National Stock Exchange, but he has a belief that percentage fees are theft. The industry standard was 0.5%. Nitin said, "We will charge a flat fee, 20 rupees." Competitors laughed at him. They said, "You can't run a business on 20 rupees, not without your own tech." But he forced the market to bend to his belief and then used the profits to buy the ability later. And the story about how this ability is built is incredible. So, Kailash Nath was a hobbyist developer, not looking for a job. He was Zerodha's customer, and Kailash would frequently message or email Nitin pointing out bugs, flaws, and inefficiencies in the platform. After one such critique, where Kailash explained exactly what was wrong and how it should be fixed technically, Nitin, frustrated with his existing vendors and impressed by Kailash, effectively said, "If you think you can do it better, why don't you come and build it for us?" He was literally trying to hire on belief. He also told him the mother of all bull markets is waiting to happen. This is what he said about this moment later. "I didn't have a business plan. I just had a gut feeling." He hired for belief and joined as a freelancer, eventually became CTO and built the entire tech in-house. Today, Zerodha manages billions of transactions with a technology team of just 35 people. Think about it, $500 million in profit and tech team of only 35 people. That is efficiency born of necessity. There's an interesting thing that Nitin says about his hiring philosophy, and I think every founder needs to hear this. We don't hire people who are looking for a job. We hire people who are looking for a calling. The abilities, the tech stack, the billions in revenue were simply lagging indicators of a belief system forged in dark that he could solve the market. In his mind, he was already a trader, a fund manager, despite lack of capital. The belief that the Indian stock market would see an unprecedented bull run and opportunity to build a discount trading platform existed. The belief is not about industry, it's not about business, it's about identity. Enough about India and America. Let's travel to Europe and see a person not from the business world. It's Thal, Austria. You have to understand where this guy Arnold started. We are talking about a village so small it's barely on the map. We are talking about post World War II Austria. It is a broken country. The men are broken. The economy is broken. This guy, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who later became Mr. Universe, Hollywood's biggest star, governor of California, grew up in a house with no telephone, no fridge, and no toilet. They had to carry water in from a well 150 yards away. By all logical ability metrics, his future was set. He should have been a police officer or a factory worker. That was the ceiling. But then he saw Reg Park on the cover, and this is the moment when the Maxim kicks in. He looked at it and said, "I am going to be Mr. Universe." Please understand the delusion of this. He is a skinny 15-year-old boy in a village. This is a village without a gym. He has zero ability, zero evidence that he can do this. But the belief was absolute. He says in his book, "It wasn't a dream, it was a vision. I saw myself on that stage. It was so real that I felt like I was already there." When he was doing 5 hours of squats in the snow or breaking into the gym on weekends because it was closed, he wasn't doing it to become a bodybuilder. In his mind, he was the bodybuilder. He was just waiting for his body to get the memo. The belief dictated the effort, and the effort created the ability. Now, fast forward, he conquers the bodybuilding world. He is a multiple time Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia. He is the greatest of all time, but he's trying to start a new thing. He comes to America, to Hollywood. He walks into the offices of agents and producers, and you have to remember in the 70s, the movie stars were small. They were not like The Rock or Arnold Schwarzenegger of today. They were human. Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino, Woody Allen, these are great actors, but they are regular sized people. Then there's Arnold, his 250 pounds. That's more than 100 kilos. He looks like a special effect. And the agents, who are the gatekeepers, they list out three reasons why he is guaranteed to fail. One, he's too big. Two, his name is way too long. And three, his accent sounds like a machine. Initially, he tried to fix his accent, renamed himself Arnold Strong for one movie, but later he realized that competition is for losers. If he tries to be Al Pacino, he loses. So he looks at his liabilities, the size, the name, the weird accent, and he realizes if I can find a role where these things are necessary, I will have zero competition. He creates a monopoly of one. Fast forward to The Terminator. James Cameron tells him, Arnold, the reason this movie works is because you sound like a machine. If you sounded like a guy from Ohio, it doesn't work. The very thing the establishment told him was his greatest weakness became the foundation of his greatest asset. A typical person would have quit after facing agent rejections, but Arnold kept going because in his mind he already considered himself a star. The movie just hadn't been released yet. Arnold never waited to become a movie star to believe he was one. I knew I was a winner back in the late 60s. I knew I was for great things. People will say that kind of thinking is totally immodest. I agree. Modesty is not a word that applies to me in any way. I hope it never will. Think about this thing. Or Warren Buffett saying, I always knew I was going to be rich. I don't think I ever doubted it for a minute. Or Steven Spielberg, the highest grossing director of all time, his films have earned total of $10.7 billion. Steven Spielberg practiced delivering an Oscar acceptance speech when he was just 12 years old at his training academy. Belief comes before ability. This system relies on a form of functional delusion, the capacity to inhabit a reality so intensely that the present reality is forced to reconfigure itself to match the vision. This belief is not a passive optimism but an active aggressive force. It is the refusal to accept the current constraints of the world as permanent. Belief often brings arrogance, and you channel that arrogance as the steam to power your dreams. Persistence is essential, and pain is a common element, as frequently cited by Isadore Sharp, founder of Four Seasons, who said, excellence is the capacity to take pain. If you are building something today, you're going to hit a wall where your resume, your bank account, and your technical skills say, stop. The data will say, you don't have the ability. That is the moment where the game actually begins. That is the moment where you should remember these stories, re-listen to this podcast, and keep going. Belief protects you during failure. It shields your ego so you can keep going long enough to acquire the ability actually. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the credentials. The applause comes after the ability, and the ability comes after the belief. Go build something impossible. I'll see you next Monday.